Marcus Chun sat in the back row of the Galactic Military Academy's advanced weaponry class, trying not to look as out of place as he felt. Around him, beings from dozens of different species examined sleek energy weapons, plasma rifles, and molecular disruptors with the casual familiarity of professionals. The human exchange student was the only representative of his species in the entire academy, a fact that everyone seemed eager to remind him of. Instructor Zyx Tau, a towering Krillian with 4 arms and chitinous plating, clicked his mandibles as he surveyed the classroom. His compound eyes reflected the sterile lighting as he gestured toward the weapon displays lining the walls. Today, we will demonstrate practical weapons knowledge, Zyx Tau announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets across 3 star systems. Each student will select materials from our classroom supplies and construct a functional weapon. You have 1 standard hour. Your creations will be tested for effectiveness, innovation, and tactical application. A ripple of excitement passed through the class. The Draconian students immediately began eyeing the plasma conduits, while the crystalline vortex clustered around the energy modulators. Marcus watched as his classmates moved with purpose toward the advanced components scattered across the supply tables. The materials were impressive by any standard. Quantum stabilizers hummed softly next to gravitic field generators. Photon emitters sat alongside molecular binding agents. Everything needed to construct weapons that could level buildings or pierce starship hulls was available for the taking. Marcus approached the supply tables slowly, noting how the other students gave him a wide berth. He had grown accustomed to the mixture of curiosity and dismissal that followed him everywhere in the academy. Humans were considered a primitive species, barely capable of interstellar travel and certainly not advanced enough to contribute meaningfully to galactic military science. Having trouble finding something suitable for your limited understanding? The voice belonged to Kethvar, a Zentaurian whose species prided itself on technological superiority. His 3 eyes glowed with barely concealed amusement as he gathered components for what appeared to be an advanced particle beam weapon. Marcus ignored the comment and continued his examination of the available materials. His hands moved past the exotic technologies his classmates were fighting over, instead focusing on more mundane items. A bundle of high-tensile synthetic cord caught his attention. Next to it lay several composite rods used for equipment calibration. A small gravity manipulation tool, designed for precision work, sat forgotten near the edge of one table. As he gathered these seemingly insignificant items, whispers followed him back to his workstation. He could hear fragments of conversation in various galactic languages, most of which he understood thanks to his translation implant. The human is taking garbage. Perhaps he doesn't understand the assignment. This should be entertaining to watch. Marcus set his materials down and began working. His hands moved with practiced precision as he examined the composite rods. They were lightweight but incredibly strong, designed to withstand the stresses of starship operations. He selected 2 that were roughly the same length and weight, testing their flexibility. The synthetic cord was even more interesting. According to its specifications, it could support the weight of a small shuttle while remaining thin enough to be nearly invisible. Marcus pulled out a small length, testing its tension and elasticity. A slow smile crossed his face as he began to understand its potential. Around him, the classroom filled with the sounds of advanced construction. Energy weapons hummed to life as students calibrated plasma flows and aligned quantum matrices. The air shimmered with test discharges as various species put their technological prowess on display. Kethvar had constructed an elegant rifle that could theoretically punch through armored plating from half a kilometer away. A group of hegemony students had collaborated on a devastating area effect weapon that used controlled antimatter reactions. Even the typically peaceful Eldery had managed to create a sophisticated stun device that could incapacitate dozens of targets simultaneously. Marcus worked steadily on his own project, seemingly oblivious to the increasingly complex weapons taking shape around him. He used the precision gravity tool to carefully shape one end of each composite rod, creating subtle curves that wouldn't be obvious to casual observation. The synthetic cord required more delicate work, and he found himself drawing on memories from his childhood on Earth. His grandfather had been an archery instructor before humans ever left their home system. During visits to the old man's ranch, Marcus had learned to craft traditional bows from materials that would have seemed primitive by galactic standards. Wood, sinew, and careful craftsmanship had been enough to create weapons that could drop game at impressive distances. The principles hadn't changed, even if the materials had evolved beyond anything his grandfather could have imagined. As Marcus worked, he became aware that Instructor ZYXTAL was making his rounds, examining each student's progress. The Krillian's compound eyes missed nothing as he evaluated the emerging weapons, offering occasional comments or suggestions. His approach to Marcus's workstation drew the attention of nearby students, who paused in their own work to observe. Human Shun, ZYXTAL said, his mandibles clicking with what might have been confusion. Your chosen materials appear to be unconventional. Perhaps you would benefit from guidance in selecting more appropriate components. Marcus looked up from his work, noting the mixture of concern and condescension in the instructor's tone. Around them, other students had stopped pretending to work and were openly watching the exchange. I appreciate the offer, sir, but I believe these materials will serve my purpose, Marcus replied respectfully. He gestured toward his partially completed project. I'm working within the parameters of the assignment, as stated. ZYXTAL's compound eyes focused on the curved composite rods and the synthetic cord that Marcus had been carefully measuring and cutting. To most observers, it would have looked like random components arranged without purpose. I see no recognizable weapon configuration, the instructor observed. Are you certain you understand the requirements? A few students chuckled at this, though they tried to hide it behind coughs and equipment adjustments. Marcus felt the familiar weight of expectation settling on his shoulders. Throughout his time at the academy, he had been constantly reminded of humanity's perceived limitations. His species was tolerated as a curiosity, but rarely taken seriously as a military force. I understand the requirements perfectly, sir, Marcus said, returning to his work. Function and effectiveness matter more than recognition, don't they? Instructor ZYXTAL's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign that Marcus had learned indicated either annoyance or deep thought. After a moment, the Krillian moved on to examine other students' work, but his compound eyes kept drifting back to Marcus's station. The human continued his careful construction, using techniques that would have been familiar to craftsmen from thousands of years in Earth's past. He tested the flexibility of his bow stave repeatedly, adjusting the curve and balance until it felt right in his hands. The synthetic cord required precise measurement to achieve the proper draw weight and arrow velocity. Creating arrows presented its own challenges. Marcus found thin calibration rods that could serve as shafts, though they required modification to achieve proper balance and flight characteristics. He used small gravity manipulation tools as arrowheads, their dense construction providing the mass needed for effective impact, while their precise engineering ensured clean aerodynamics. As the hour progressed, the weapons around him grew increasingly sophisticated. Plasma discharge rates were optimized. Quantum targeting systems were calibrated. Energy efficiency ratios were calculated to 6 decimal places. The classroom hummed with the power of advanced galactic technology. Marcus worked in relative silence, his hands moving with the careful precision of someone who understood that the simplest solutions were often the most effective. He strung his bow and tested its draw, making minor adjustments to the cord length and attachment points. The weapon felt alive in his hands, storing and releasing energy in a way that was both ancient and timeless. With minutes remaining in the exercise, he crafted a quiver from available materials and filled it with the arrows he had constructed. The finished product looked deceptively simple compared to the advanced weapons surrounding it, but Marcus knew that appearance could be deceiving. Time. Instructor ZYX Tal announced. Weapons down. Prepare for demonstration phase. The classroom fell silent as students set aside their tools and prepared to present their creations. Energy weapons powered down with fading hums, and various species arranged their technological marvels for inspection. Marcus stood behind his workstation, bow in hand, and waited for his turn to prove that sometimes the oldest solutions were the most effective ones. The demonstration phase began with the advanced weapons, exactly as Marcus had expected. Instructor ZYX Tal called each student forward to present their creation, explain its function, and demonstrate its capabilities on the testing range that materialized from the classroom floor. HFY went first, his Zentorian pride evident as he hefted his sleek particle rifle. The weapon was a masterpiece of miniaturization, packing enough destructive power to penetrate starship armor into a frame barely larger than a traditional projectile weapon. Quantum-enhanced particle acceleration with molecular targeting matrix, HFY announced, his 3 eyes glowing with satisfaction. Maximum effective range of 2 kilometers, capable of adjusting beam frequency to counter adaptive armor systems. He fired at the designated target, a reinforced testing plate designed to simulate various combat scenarios. The beam struck with surgical precision, boring a perfect hole through 6 inches of advanced composite material. The classroom sensors immediately began analyzing energy output, penetration depth, and residual radiation patterns. Impressive, Instructor ZYX Tal noted, his mandibles clicking approvingly. Efficiency rating of 92% with excellent power management. This weapon would serve well in both ship-to-ship and ground combat situations. Student after student followed, each presenting increasingly sophisticated weapons. The Hegemony team's antimatter device created a controlled explosion that left a crater in the reinforced testing surface. The Elderly stun weapon demonstrated its effectiveness by temporarily disabling the classroom's secondary systems from 20 meters away. Each presentation drew appreciative clicks, hums, and other species-specific sounds of approval. Marcus noticed how the demonstrations followed predictable patterns. Energy input, technological enhancement, devastating output. The weapons were undeniably effective, representing centuries of galactic military evolution. They could engage targets at extreme ranges, adapt to changing battlefield conditions, and deliver precisely calculated amounts of destruction. They were also completely dependent on power sources, maintenance schedules, and technological infrastructure that could be disrupted or destroyed. As his turn approached, Marcus became aware of the shifting mood in the classroom. Some students watched with barely concealed amusement, clearly expecting entertainment rather than education. Others seemed genuinely curious about what the primitive human might have cobbled together from rejected materials. Human Chun, Instructor ZYX Tal called, his compound eyes focusing on Marcus with what might have been scientific interest. Please present your weapon for evaluation. Marcus stepped forward, bow in hand, arrow nocked but not drawn. The silence in the classroom was different now, expectant rather than respectful. He could sense the collective assumption that he was about to demonstrate the limitations of human technology and thinking. This is a projectile weapon based on stored mechanical energy, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. It requires no external power source, has no electronic components that can be disrupted, and can be constructed from available materials in almost any environment. A few students exchanged glances that clearly said projectile weapon, with the kind of dismissive tone usually reserved for historical curiosities. Marcus continued his explanation without acknowledging the reaction. Effective range depends on ammunition and environmental factors, but typically extends to several hundred meters with maintained accuracy. The weapon is completely silent in operation and produces no electromagnetic signature that can be detected by conventional sensors. HFY's voice carried a note of condescending amusement. How does a primitive projectile weapon compare to quantum-enhanced particle acceleration? What possible tactical advantage could it offer? Marcus turned toward the Zentorian, noting how several other students nodded in agreement with the question. It was exactly the opening he had hoped for. "May I demonstrate?" he asked, addressing Instructor Zyxtal rather than responding directly to the challenge. The Krillian gestured toward the testing range with two of his forearms. "Proceed with your demonstration. The sensors will evaluate effectiveness using standard parameters." Marcus moved to the designated firing line, noting how the testing surface had reset itself after the previous demonstrations. Clean composite material stretched across the range, marked with distance indicators and targeting zones. The classroom sensor array focused on his position, ready to analyze whatever primitive display he was about to provide. He raised the bow smoothly, drawing the synthetic cord back in one fluid motion. The weapon bent gracefully under the tension, storing energy in the curve of the composite rods exactly as similar weapons had done for thousands of years on Earth. The arrow settled against the cord, its improvised point gleaming under the classroom lights. The draw felt perfect, weight balanced, tension consistent, arrow alignment true. Marcus had spent enough time with traditional archery to recognize when everything was working correctly, and this bow performed better than anything he had crafted from wood and sinew. He took aim at the center of the testing surface and released. The arrow flew with a whisper of displaced air, covering the distance to the target faster than most observers could track. It struck the reinforced composite material with enough force to penetrate completely, embedding itself deep enough that only the fletching remained visible. The classroom sensors immediately began their analysis, but Marcus wasn't finished with his demonstration. "Reload time," he announced, drawing a second arrow from his improvised quiver. The motion was smooth and practiced, knocking and drawing in a continuous sequence that took less than 3 seconds. The second arrow struck within centimeters of the first, penetrating just as deeply. Rate of fire, Marcus continued, drawing and releasing arrows in steady rhythm. Each shot landed within a tight grouping at the center of the target, the impacts creating a pattern that would have been acceptable at any archery range on Earth. The entire sequence took less than 20 seconds. When his quiver was empty, Marcus lowered the bow and turned back toward the classroom. The silence was complete now, but it carried a different quality than before. Students stared at the target where 7 arrows clustered in a space smaller than a dinner plate, each one driven deep enough to disable or kill most galactic species. Instructor Zyxtal approached the testing surface, examining the arrow grouping with his compound eyes. His mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was a sign of confusion or recalculation. Sensors indicate consistent penetration of 4.7 centimeters through reinforced composite, the instructor announced. Impact velocity measured at approximately 120 meters per second. Accuracy parameters fall within acceptable combat standards. The Krillian paused, studying his readings more carefully. Reload and fire sequence averaged at 2.8 seconds per shot. No electromagnetic signature detected. No energy expenditure registered beyond initial kinetic transfer. Kethvar stepped forward, his 3 eyes focused on the target with obvious disbelief. Impossible. Projectile weapons cannot achieve that level of accuracy or penetration without technological enhancement. Yet the sensor data is quite clear. Instructor Zyxtal replied, his mandibles continuing their confused clicking. The weapon performed exactly as Humanshin described. Silent, accurate, and completely independent of technological support systems. Marcus retrieved his arrows from the testing surface, noting how several had bent slightly upon impact, but remained functional. With proper materials and more time, he could have created ammunition capable of much greater penetration and accuracy. The tactical advantages become more apparent when you consider operational limitations, Marcus said, addressing the class while inspecting his arrows. Energy weapons require power cells that can be depleted or destroyed. Electronic systems can be jammed or disabled by electromagnetic pulses. Complex weapons need maintenance schedules and replacement parts that may not be available in extended combat situations. He held up one of his arrows, its simple construction visible to everyone in the room. This can be repaired with basic tools. The bow itself can be reconstructed from materials available on most inhabited worlds. No training in advanced physics or quantum mechanics required. A draconian student raised one clawed hand. But surely the limited range and power make such weapons ineffective against modern armor and defensive systems? Marcus smiled, remembering similar questions from Academy instructors who assumed human military history consisted entirely of primitive conflicts. They had never studied Earth's actual combat records, never examined how human forces had adapted projectile weapons to remain effective against increasingly sophisticated opponents. Range and power can be scaled appropriately for the tactical situation, he replied. These arrows were designed for demonstration purposes using classroom materials and limited construction time. With proper resources, projectile weapons can engage targets at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers and deliver sufficient kinetic energy to penetrate modern combat armor. The classroom erupted in voices speaking multiple galactic languages simultaneously, most expressing variations on the theme of disbelief. Marcus waited for the noise to die down before continuing his explanation. More importantly, this weapon system offers tactical flexibility that energy weapons cannot match. Arrow types can be varied for specific targets. Armor-piercing for hard targets, expanding point for soft targets, chemical or biological payloads for area denial. The same launching system can deliver completely different effects depending on mission requirements. Instructor ZYX Tal raised all 4 arms for silence. When the classroom settled, his compound eyes fixed on Marcus with unmistakable scientific interest. You are suggesting that primitive projectile weapons offer advantages over advanced energy systems in specific tactical situations? I'm suggesting that effectiveness matters more than complexity, Marcus replied. The best weapon is the one that completes the mission, not necessarily the one that represents the highest level of technological advancement. The silence that followed carried a different quality entirely. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, Marcus sensed that his audience was actually considering his words rather than dismissing them out of hand. 3 weeks later, Marcus found himself standing in a very different classroom. Instead of the sterile academic environment of the advanced weaponry course, he was surrounded by the harsh realities of the Academy's combat simulation facility. Real-world scenarios played out in holographic detail around him, and the stakes felt considerably higher than any theoretical exercise. The change had begun immediately after his bow demonstration. Word of the human who had outperformed quantum weapons with classroom scraps had spread through the Academy faster than subspace communications. Within days, Marcus found himself invited to guest lectures, strategy seminars, and practical demonstration requests from instructors across multiple departments. Instructor ZYX Tal had been particularly persistent, arranging for Marcus to address advanced tactical theory classes and weapons development seminars. The Krillian's scientific curiosity seemed genuinely aroused by the implications of Marcus's approach, and he had begun incorporating human military history into his curriculum. Today's simulation involved a scenario that had been specifically designed to challenge conventional galactic military thinking. The setup was deceptively simple: a small unit trapped behind enemy lines, cut off from supply and communication, required to survive and complete their mission using only resources available in hostile territory. Marcus stood with 5 other students from various species, each representing different approaches to tactical problem solving. Their equipment had been deliberately limited to basic survival gear and a few simple tools. No energy weapons, no quantum communicators, no technological solutions that required infrastructure support. The mission briefing had been equally stark. Reach the extraction point 30 kilometers away through enemy-controlled territory, gather intelligence on enemy positions, and Avoid detection by advanced sensor networks. Failure meant starting over. Success meant advancement to the Academy's most elite tactical programs. The other team members were impressive by any standard. Vextar, a hegemony warrior whose species had perfected combined arms tactics across multiple star systems. Lithia, an elderly strategist known for her ability to coordinate complex operations across vast distances. Torch, a draconian assault specialist whose personal combat record was legendary even by Academy standards. They were also completely out of their element in this stripped-down scenario, exactly as Marcus had expected. "We need to establish communication with Command," Vextar announced as the simulation began. His massive frame moved with surprising grace as he examined their starting position. "Without tactical data links, we're operating blind." "Agreed," Lithia replied, her crystalline form reflecting the ambient light in patterns that indicated deep thought. "Standard doctrine requires constant intelligence updates for mission success. We need to find a way to restore communications." Marcus listened to their planning session while studying the terrain around them. The simulation had placed them in a mountainous region with dense forest cover and limited sightlines. Enemy patrols moved through predetermined patterns, their routes visible only when the hostiles came within direct visual range. "The communication problem is secondary," Torch interjected, his reptilian features set in a permanent scowl. "We need to neutralize enemy sensor networks before attempting movement. Direct assault on their detection grid should clear a path to the extraction point." The suggestions were tactically sound by galactic military standards. Establish communications, gather intelligence, apply overwhelming force to neutralize obstacles. These approaches had served various species well across countless conflicts throughout the galaxy. They were also exactly what the enemy would be expecting. "May I suggest an alternative approach?" Marcus asked quietly. The other team members turned toward him with expressions ranging from polite interest to barely concealed skepticism. His reputation as the human who had impressed weapons instructors with primitive technology preceded him, but reputation didn't necessarily translate to practical tactical knowledge. "We're listening," Vextar said diplomatically. Marcus gestured toward the forested terrain surrounding their position. "Instead of trying to restore technological advantages we don't have, we should focus on advantages we do have. This environment offers concealment, multiple approach routes, and opportunities for improvised equipment construction. Concealment from advanced sensors requires sophisticated countermeasures," Lithia pointed out. "We lack the technological resources for effective stealth against enemy detection systems." "Advanced sensors have limitations," Marcus replied. "They're designed to detect energy signatures, electronic emissions, and predictable movement patterns. They're not necessarily optimized for detecting someone who understands how to move without creating those signatures." He pointed toward a patrol route visible through the trees. "Enemy forces are following programmed search patterns based on standard tactical doctrine. They're looking for radio communications, energy weapon discharges, and movement patterns that match galactic military training." Torch's scowl deepened. "You're suggesting we abandon proven tactical methods for primitive techniques?" "I'm suggesting we use methods the enemy isn't prepared to counter," Marcus clarified. "Our technology has been stripped away, but our intelligence and adaptability haven't been. We can turn those limitations into advantages if we think differently about the problem." The debate that followed reminded Marcus of his first weeks at the Academy, when every suggestion he made was met with reflexive dismissal. His teammates weren't hostile, but they struggled to understand how abandoning technological solutions could improve their tactical situation. Marcus let them argue for several minutes before demonstrating his point practically. While they debated communication protocols and sensor countermeasures, he began gathering materials from their immediate environment. Fallen branches, tough plant fibers, and small rocks were abundant in the forest setting. Within minutes, he had constructed a simple but effective sling using techniques that dated back to Earth's prehistoric period. The weapon was silent, required no maintenance, and could be concealed completely when not in use. More importantly, it could disable enemy sensors without creating the electromagnetic signatures that would alert other systems to their presence. "Watch," Marcus said quietly, interrupting the ongoing tactical debate. He selected a smooth stone from the forest floor, fitted it into his improvised sling, and took aim at an enemy sensor node barely visible through the trees. The stone flew in a high arc, striking the sensor array with enough force to shatter its housing. The device went dark immediately, creating a gap in the enemy detection network that none of their technological solutions could have achieved so quietly. The silence that followed was becoming familiar to Marcus. His teammates stared at the disabled sensor, then at the simple weapon in his hands, clearly struggling to reconcile what they had just witnessed with their understanding of modern warfare. "How did you calculate trajectory and impact force without targeting computers?" Vextar asked, his voice carrying genuine puzzlement. "Practice and understanding of basic physics," Marcus replied, already selecting another stone. "Gravity, velocity, and impact energy work the same way regardless of technological level. You just need to understand the principles instead of relying on computers to calculate them for you." Over the next several hours, Marcus's unconventional approach proved increasingly effective. While his teammates gradually adapted to thinking beyond technological solutions, he demonstrated technique after technique that their academy training had never covered. Silent movement through forest terrain that avoided disturbing vegetation or creating trackable patterns. Construction of improvised tools and weapons from available materials. Reading environmental signs to predict enemy patrol routes and timing. Basic fieldcraft that had been considered obsolete by galactic military standards but remained devastatingly effective against opponents who weren't prepared for it. The mission that was supposed to take the entire day was completed in under 6 hours. They reached the extraction point ahead of schedule, having gathered the required intelligence while avoiding detection by forces that possessed overwhelming technological advantages. The debriefing session was unlike anything Marcus had experienced at the Academy. Instead of condescending questions about human limitations, he faced genuine curiosity about human military methods. His teammates asked detailed questions about training techniques, tactical doctrine, and strategic thinking that had allowed his species to remain effective even when facing technologically superior opponents. Instructor Zoyaxtal arrived for the final evaluation, his compound eyes reflecting what Marcus had learned to recognize as intense scientific interest. The simulation parameters were designed to challenge conventional tactical thinking, the Krillian announced. Most teams require multiple attempts to complete this scenario successfully. Your team achieved all objectives on the first attempt while maintaining complete operational security. He paused, studying the after-action reports with obvious fascination. Analysis indicates that success was primarily due to the adoption of what the Academy classifies as primitive tactical methods. Human Shun, your approach appears to have influenced the entire team's performance significantly. Marcus exchanged glances with his teammates, noting how their earlier skepticism had transformed into something approaching respect. The simulation had proven what he had been trying to explain since arriving at the Academy. Effectiveness mattered more than sophistication, and the simplest solution was often the most reliable. "Request permission to speak freely, sir," Marcus said. Instructor ZYXDAL's mandibles clicked with amusement. "Granted, the methods aren't primitive," Marcus replied. "They're foundational. Everything we've learned at the Academy builds on basic principles of tactics, logistics, and adaptation. When you strip away the technology and focus on those fundamentals, you discover that good tactics work regardless of the tools available." The Krillian considered this statement for several moments, his compound eyes reflecting the lights of the simulation facility. Around them, other classes were beginning their own scenarios, the sounds of conventional military exercises echoing through the complex. Human Chun, Instructor Zextal, said finally, "I believe it's time we discussed your advanced placement into the Strategic Innovation Program." It appears the Academy has much to learn from human tactical doctrine. As they left the simulation facility, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that first weapons demonstration. The bow he had constructed from classroom supplies had been more than a simple projectile weapon. It had been proof that innovation didn't require complexity, that effectiveness could emerge from understanding rather than technology. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that human military thinking had value beyond what the galactic community had previously recognized. The Academy was beginning to understand that Earth species brought more than just curiosity and primitive enthusiasm to the interstellar community. They brought solutions that worked when everything else failed, tactics that succeeded when technology couldn't provide answers, and a fundamental understanding that the best weapon was always the one that completed the mission. The instructor had asked for a weapons display, and Marcus had delivered exactly that. But the lesson had extended far beyond classroom demonstrations into the heart of what made military forces truly effective across any environment or technological level.